When Lin Jinxing was 10 years old, I became her stepmother. Lin Jinxing hated me to the core. To be honest, I didn't like her either. I couldn't even pretend otherwise. "You vile woman. What right do you have to make my dad cut off my allowance?" Lin Jinxing shouted at me, her voice brimming with rage. I stared back at her garishly dyed hair, pitying her for sinking to such poor aesthetic choices. "Well, since you decided to drop out of school on your own, I figured you must have already planned for your future. From now on, all we can offer you is our best wishes." I smiled as I spoke, trying my best to appear kind. "Oh, don't act all righteous. You just want to drive me out of here, so you can save the money you spend on me and keep it all for yourself. Dream on." "Dad, Dad." She stormed around the house, searching furiously for Lao Lin, like a creditor demanding payment. "Your dad's not home," I said lazily, leaning against the doorframe. "When will he be back?" "Not anytime soon." "Fine. Then I'll sit here and wait until he comes home. Suit yourself." With that, I turned and headed back to my room, completely uninterested in dealing with her tantrum. "Stop right there. You and I need to settle this today." As if worried her words lacked impact, she suddenly grabbed my shoulder forcefully, turning me back to face her. That's when I realized she had grown taller than me by half a head. "We can talk, but keep your hands to yourself." I pried her arm off my shoulder, staring her down with a warning look. "What's the matter? Scared?" "Li Xiaowei, let me tell you something. I'm no longer the little girl you could push around. From now on, you can't mess with me anymore." "Oh, so this is what they call growing a backbone?" I sneered. "Li Xiaowei, don't think I don't know what you tried to do when I was 12, tricking me up onto the rooftop." Her gaze bore into me, and for a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of something akin to murderous intent. "If you hate me that much, the knife's in the kitchen. You can kill me right now. No need to make excuses." My tone was indifferent. "I'm not that stupid. Why would I ruin my own life over you? But as long as you're in this house, I'll find 1,000 ways to make your life a living hell." The little wolf had finally shed her sheep's clothing, baring her fangs at me. "If I were afraid, I wouldn't still be here," I said coldly, stepping closer to Lin Jinxing and locking eyes with her. Perhaps she was still a novice at playing the wolf. Her confidence faltered under my seasoned, witch-like glare. A flicker of panic crossed her face, and she was at a loss for how to continue threatening me. Amused by her sudden awkwardness, I let a mocking smile tug at the corner of my lips, tossing her a look of disdain before strolling leisurely back to my room. If I had any regrets at that moment, it would be what she just brought up, that incident when she was 12. I had lured her to the rooftop with the intent of ending her life, only to hesitate at the very last second. Lao Lin's wife passed away from illness when Lin Jinxing was 9 years old. A year later, he married me, drawing a great deal of criticism from those around us. People believed that Lao Lin had been blinded by lust, remarrying so soon, not even waiting the traditional 3 years of mourning for his first wife. The fact that I was much younger than him only seemed to confirm their suspicions. Rather than seeking a wife, he wanted to find a mother for Lin Jinxing, someone who would love and care for her wholeheartedly. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that a 10-year-old girl could be so cunning. At first, I put in a lot of effort to find even the smallest aspects of her work to praise, hoping to inspire her interest in studying through encouragement. So I stopped pretending, dropping the compliments and opting instead for relentless study drills, leaving no room for her to slack off. Neither of us was willing to compromise, turning every evening into a grueling battle. Gradually, she found new ways to retaliate against my pressure. She would refuse to eat, claiming my cooking was inedible, only to turn around and run to the neighbor's house, pitifully telling them she hadn't been fed. A single meal at the neighbor's was enough to spread my supposed cruelty far and wide. From then on, the neighbors' gazes toward me carried disdain and loathing. Lin Jinxing, meanwhile, basked in their sympathy. Even her accidental bumps and scrapes were blown out of proportion in their eyes. When asked how she got hurt, she would stay silent, her eyes filling with unshed tears. At school, she deliberately dirted her uniform and unraveled the neat hairstyle I had given her in the morning. When teachers scolded her about her appearance, she put on an Oscar-worthy performance, explaining that everything was her neglectful stepmother's fault. The teacher's sympathy for her and disdain for me were palpable at parent-teacher conferences. They naturally assumed that all of her problems stemmed from me. Hidden behind their veiled criticisms was a singular message. Even if she isn't your biological daughter, you shouldn't be so heartless. This type of act became Lin Jingxing's forte during those years. Outside the home, she was the pitiable victim of a wicked stepmother. Inside, she reigned as an undisputed queen. She once cried to Lao Lin, accusing me of abuse, presenting as evidence the endless corrections I assigned her, pages and pages of mistakes she had to redo. She's still just a child. Let's not push her so hard. Maybe we should try enrolling her in a tutoring class. Lao Lin tentatively suggested, hoping to ease the conflict between us. With such a weak foundation, no tutoring class in the world can help her. Do you have money to throw away? Do you know how expensive tutoring is these days? Do you think she's worth it? I retorted mercilessly. We were an ordinary family. Together, Lao Lin and I barely earned enough to cover regular expenses, let alone afford such costly extras. But seeing the nightly chaos between me and Lin Jingxing, Lao Lin gritted his teeth and enrolled her in a tutoring program. Watching him take her to class every weekend, I said nothing, though my indifferent attitude made it clear that I did not support the decision. After a semester of tutoring, her grades were predictably abysmal. There was no improvement at all. Faced with the results, Lao Lin fell silent. "Are you planning to continue next semester?" I asked, holding up her test papers to avoid embarrassing Lao Lin further. Lin Jingxing, having long grown tired of the tutoring routine, which she found no better than my nightly drills, answered without hesitation. "I don't want to go anymore. The teachers there are terrible. I don't understand a single thing they say." "Oh, so it's the teachers who are bad, not that you were sleeping through class? Did you enjoy those naps?" I teased deliberately. "The teachers are terrible. Which eye of yours saw me sleeping?" She shot back indignantly, as if I had gravely insulted her. I didn't argue, just let out a cold laugh. Every time Lao Lin brought her back, the red marks on her face from sleeping on her side hadn't completely faded. Those marks, hidden under her falling hair, seemed like a mockery aimed directly at me. I no longer bothered exposing her lies. I simply turned to Lao Lin, who had already been disillusioned by her grades. He couldn't bring himself to defend her anymore, ultimately yielding to her wishes and canceling the tutoring. And so, our nightly battles resumed, while my reputation among the neighbors sank to new lows. Lin Jingxing tried to use the pressure from others to punish me, but I didn't care. I ignored her crude performances altogether. When I heard the door open, I knew Lao Lin was home. Before I could move, Lin Jingxing had already stormed over to him, her face full of rage. "Dad, what right do you have to cut off my allowance?" Lao Lin, caught off guard by her presence, froze for a moment before glancing at me awkwardly from behind her, stammering, "About that money, I just think." Unable to bear watching Lao Lin struggle, I stepped in to answer for him. "You're 20 years old now, an adult. Since you made the decision to drop out of school on your own, we're no longer obligated to support you. From now on, you'll have to fend for yourself." "Shut up. I wasn't asking you." Lin Jingxing snapped back before turning to glare at Lao Lin. "Dad, is this what you think too?" Faced with her accusing tone and my unwavering stance, Lao Lin was visibly uncomfortable, his face flushed with embarrassment as he searched for the right words. "So that's how it is," Lin Jingxing shouted hysterically. "Ever since she walked through that door, you haven't cared about me at all. The saying is true, a stepmother always means a stepfather. You've stood by and watched her treat me this way for years. Am I even your real daughter anymore?" Her voice cracked as she screamed at Lao Lin, painting him as though he were some clueless, tyrannical king straight out of a fairy tale. Ignoring her tantrum, I gently suggested to Lao Lin, "Why don't you take a shower first? I'll whip up your favorite, spicy stir-fried bacon, and you can tell me if my cooking's improved." As I spoke, I subtly nudged him toward the bathroom, giving him an unspoken cue to escape. Lao Lin, as if receiving a royal pardon, nodded hurriedly and darted into the bathroom without a second glance. Lin Jinxing stood frozen, staring after him, utterly stunned. She couldn't believe her father had actually left her there to go take a shower. "Dad," she yelled helplessly at the bathroom door, her voice trembling with anger. I walked past her as if nothing had happened and headed into the kitchen. Not willing to let it go, she followed close behind, pointing at me as she continued to yell, "What kind of spell did you cast on my dad to make him treat me like this? You wicked woman. You'll die a horrible death." As I stirred the food in the pan, I replied calmly, "Have you ever stopped to think about what kind of consequences your actions might bring for your father?" Her tirade halted for a second, but she quickly retorted, "He's my real dad. It's his job to spoil me. But you? You're nothing. Who do you think you are? My dad only treats you well because of your sneaky, underhanded tricks. You're just a thief trying to take over my dad and this family." "That's an interesting take," I said, turning to face her with the spatula in hand. "But why don't you tell me what exactly your dad and this house have that's worth stealing? If you hadn't married my dad, you'd just be some country bumpkin. How else could you stay in this city and live in our house?" Her words were dripping with disdain, her gaze filled with scorn. "Country bumpkin?" I chuckled at her categorization, amused by her black and white view of the world. "Yes, I'm from the countryside," I said with a smile. "But I earned my way into college through my own efforts. I got a job in the city through my own abilities. I've never relied on emotional manipulation to shamelessly squander my parents' money. So there's nothing about me I need to hide." "Stop trying to act all righteous," she sneered. "I've lived with you since I was 10. Do you think I don't know what kind of person you are? You're sly, vicious, and a master manipulator. If I hadn't pretended to go along with you back then, I probably wouldn't even be alive now." Hearing her tirade, I simply smiled again, unbothered, and turned back to the stove. "Don't think I don't know," she muttered from behind me, "that you tried to kill me back then?" I flipped on the range hood, letting its roar drown out her words. Her 12th birthday night was unforgettable for both of us. That day, Lao Lin was on a business trip, leaving just the two of us at home. I prepared dinner as usual, and we sat across from each other, eating in silence. Suddenly, she looked up and asked, "Is my dad coming home today?"
"He's still busy.
Probably won't be back until next week," I replied calmly. Upon hearing my answer, she slammed her bowl onto the ground. Soup and noodles splattered everywhere. "It's my birthday today. How could you all not even care? My dad wasn't like this before." Looking at the mess she'd made, I wasn't particularly surprised. "Who said he forgot your birthday? He already prepared a gift for you. He just told me not to spoil the surprise too soon." "A gift? Where is it? Show me now." Her eyes lit up with excitement. "But first, you have to clean up the mess you just made. Then, I'll take you to see your gift." She pouted in displeasure at my request, clearly reluctant. But for once, she grudgingly cleaned up her mess. Meanwhile, I went to my room and pulled out a scarf. "Don't tell me this is the birthday gift my dad got me. It's an old scarf. I've seen my mom wear it before." Her face darkened with anger, feeling she'd been toyed with. "Of course not. It's just a prop for today."
"A prop?" Her curiosity piqued.
I nodded and then led her up to the rooftop. "What are we doing here?" she asked, confused. "Your dad's gift is up here. Now, I'm going to blindfold you with this scarf and lead you to it. It's called a sense of ceremony." At that time, Lin Jinxing was still a child, and this little gimmick excited her. She eagerly nodded and urged, "Hurry up. I can't wait." I blindfolded her with the scarf, took her hand, and began leading her step by step toward the edge of the rooftop. When we were just 2 steps away from the edge, she seemed to sense something, suddenly gripping my hand tightly and refusing to move. "What's wrong? Why aren't you walking?" I asked gently. She didn't answer, but I could feel her fear as she shakily tried to pull off the blindfold with her free hand. I quickly stopped her, my grip firmer than usual, with a hint of menace. "Why aren't you moving?" I raised my voice, and even I didn't recognize the cold, menacing tone that escaped my lips. It sounded like a demon had borrowed my voice. I'm scared." She wasn't lying. Her body was trembling slightly. "We're almost at your gift. What's there to be afraid of? Come on, let's keep going," I insisted, coaxing her forward. But she didn't budge, her palms slick with sweat. Suddenly, she said, "Mom, I don't really want the gift anymore." The word "mom" startled me. Ever since I joined this family, she had always referred to me as "hey." "What did you just call me?" I thought I must have misheard. "Mom," she repeated. My heart started pounding, and my eyes inexplicably welled up with tears. "After today, I'll be 12. I don't think I can keep being as bratty as I've been. From now on, I want to be a good kid, someone you and Dad can be proud of." "Okay, Mom." I responded calmly, though inside I was overwhelmed with emotion. I took her hand and continued leading her forward, but this time, I turned and walked in a different direction. Though her steps were still hesitant, she followed me until we reached her gift. I untied the scarf, letting her see the large doll Lao Lin had bought for her. She hugged the doll and, for the first time, smiled at me. "Thank you, Mom." But I noticed something off about her smile. There was a hint of reluctance, even insincerity. After that night, she seemed like a completely different person. She stopped throwing tantrums and became more focused on her studies. It was as if that night had cast a spell on her, transforming her into someone new. The day she received her college acceptance letter, Lao Lin wept with joy. "Now we can finally be at ease," he said. I nodded in agreement, though deep down, I wasn't convinced. "Hey, after I leave, don't go into my room for no reason. And don't touch any of my stuff." In that moment, her old nickname for me returned. "Hey." I knew then that my suspicions were correct. The old Lin Jinxing had come back. Lin Jinxing locked herself in her room and refused to eat or drink. If this goes on, she's going to starve herself. What should we do? Lao Lin looked at me anxiously. If she's not eating, it means she's not hungry. When she's hungry, she'll come out, I replied, expressionless, taking another bite of my food. Isn't this too cruel? She's still just a child. Cruel? Wasn't it cruel when she dropped out of school without telling us? Wasn't it cruel when the loan company called to collect the debts she'd racked up? Wasn't it cruel when she spent our money partying while lying to us about attending school? My barrage of questions left Lao Lin speechless once again. When we found out from her classmates that she had already dropped out, Lao Lin almost fainted from the shock. And as the saying goes, trouble never comes alone. That afternoon, we received a call from a loan company demanding repayment, saying they couldn't reach her and had no choice but to contact us. Faced with the sudden burden of 80,000 yuan in debt, Lao Lin and I were at a loss. We had very different ideas about how to handle it. I believed that whoever incurred the debt should pay it off. But Lao Lin, unable to bear seeing his daughter suffer, went against my protests and used our savings to cover her mess. The 20th of every month was the day Lao Lin always sent her allowance. This month, I stopped him. Even if she's done wrong, she still needs money to survive. We can't just cut her off, Lao Lin said, still unwilling to go too hard on her. She's still lying to us. If you keep sending her money, how long will it take before we see her again? What if something happens to her out there? Cut her off, and she'll come back soon enough. It's for her own good, I reasoned, trying a different approach to persuade him. After some thought, Lao Lin reluctantly agreed. Are you sure she'll come back? He asked, still worried. Absolutely, I assured him. It turned out my plan worked. Denied her allowance, Lin Jinxing returned home not long after, though her anger and defiance were stronger than ever. While I held firm, Lao Lin's soft heart left him fretting over her. Watching her go without food or water for days, he ended up losing weight himself. From now on, I'll handle her. You stay out of it and just do as I say, I commanded firmly. Lao Lin, knowing my temperament, sighed deeply before nodding in resignation. By the third day, Lin Jinxing still hadn't come out to eat, but I knew she was fine. She wouldn't starve. Every night after the lights went out, I could hear the faint rustling of her sneaking out to rummage for snacks. The large box of snacks I had just bought was nearly empty, becoming her lifeline in our standoff. If I wasn't mistaken, the moment the snacks ran out would also be the end of her hunger strike. Lately, I had the nagging feeling that people were whispering about me behind my back. At first, I thought it was just paranoia. But as the strange looks became more frequent, I realized it wasn't my imagination. You really can't judge a book by its cover. She looks so sweet and innocent, but who knows how wicked she might be. There's no such thing as a good stepmother. That poor girl. If what that kid says is true, this woman must be terrifying. Imagine wanting to kill her stepdaughter. Even my coworkers had started gossiping about me, and the neighbors would stop talking whenever I walked by. It felt like being transported back to the days when Lin Jinxing's theatrics were at their peak. One evening, as I returned home carrying groceries, I saw Lao Lin banging on her door, his face pale and contorted with anger. Jinxing, open the door right now. You can't just say whatever you want online. I had never seen Lao Lin so agitated before. Worried, I put down the groceries and walked over. Lao Lin, calm down. Your heart isn't in great shape. What's going on? Before Lao Lin could answer, the door suddenly swung open. Standing there was Lin Jinxing, holding her phone up to our faces while talking incessantly to whoever was on the other end. Look, everyone, this is the stepmother I told you about and my dad. See for yourselves. Lao Lin clutched his chest, looking at Jinxing with difficulty. You can't do this. But I wasn't as restrained as Lao Lin. I walked straight over and slapped her hard across the face. The sound was crisp, loud, and completely unexpected. She froze, stunned, covering her cheek as she stared at me for a moment. Then, as if awakening from a daze, she turned to her phone with excitement. Did you see that? Did you see it? This evil woman just hit me. Now you know I was telling the truth. It was the first time I had ever laid a hand on her. Jinxing, you've gone too far. You can't treat your mother this way. Lao Lin's voice, though weak, carried a rare note of anger. My mother? I've never thought of her as my mother. In fact, ever since she entered this house, I've lost my father. She screamed at Lao Lin, adjusting the angle of her phone to frame herself perfectly on screen. Everyone, look at this man. This so-called father of mine. That woman hit me, and instead of taking my side, he scolds me instead.
What kind of father does that?
Back then, he was blinded by lust. My mom had only been gone for a year when he couldn't wait to marry this much younger woman. Ever since she came into our lives, she's made me miserable, but my dad turns a blind eye to everything. Anytime something goes wrong, it's somehow always my fault. I've suffered for years under her abuse. Now I'm fighting back. I'm going to expose their lies and send them both to hell. She ranted at her phone like a martyr about to meet their fate. I stepped forward, ready to deliver a second slap, but the sound of Lao Lin collapsing behind me stopped me in my tracks. I turned to see him lying on the ground and rushed to hold him. Looking back at Jinxing, I shouted, "Stop it. Call an ambulance now." Call an ambulance? You think I'm still 3 years old and easy to fool? What a great act. As if this will scare me. Folks, don't worry. This is just one of my dad's tricks. Leaving her to her nonsense, I hurried to the living room to grab my phone and call for help. As I dialed, tears poured uncontrollably down my face. Lao Lin suffered a sudden heart attack and a stroke, landing him in the ICU. I sat in the hospital hallway for an entire day and night. Early the next morning, the doctor approached me with a heavy expression. "The prognosis isn't good. You should prepare for the worst." By then, all the emotions in me had drained away along with my last tear. Numb and hollow, I thanked the doctor and walked back home step by step. The moment I unlocked the front door, the sound of loud music and chatter hit me. Through the half-open door of Lin Jingsing's room, I saw her chatting excitedly on her phone while playing music. Since Lao Lin was taken to the hospital, she hadn't visited even once. Her ease and indifference made it seem as though Lao Lin's condition was just an act, as she had claimed. I averted my eyes, entered my room, and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper from the back of my drawer. Next, I went to the kitchen and selected the sharpest knife, holding it firmly in my hand as I walked straight into Lin Jingsing's room. When I arrived behind her, she didn't even notice me. She was too busy talking animatedly to her online family, the smugness still plastered across her face. It wasn't until she noticed warnings popping up on her screen that she turned around in alarm, her expression twisting from triumph to panic. What are you doing?" she stammered, all the glee vanishing from her face. I didn't answer. Calmly, I placed the blade against her neck, bent down slightly, and glanced at her phone screen.
Perfect.
The camera captured both of our faces squarely. I waved at her audience and said, "I hear you all love gossip and drama. Well, today, I'll tell you a real story." With that, I unfolded the piece of paper and held it up to the camera, ensuring everyone could read it clearly. It read, "Please, kind-hearted people, take in my daughter. She is well-behaved and healthy. With deepest gratitude. Date of birth, June 3rd. This is the note left with Lin Jingsing when her biological mother abandoned her. She was never Lao Lin and his wife's biological daughter." "You're lying. My parents never said I wasn't their real daughter. You're insane if you think some scrap of paper can make me believe your nonsense." "I'm not insane. What I'm saying is the truth. If you don't believe me, there's one way to prove it," I replied, my voice eerily calm. "And what's that?" "Let's see what kind of trick you've cooked up this time," she shot back, defiant and sneering. "We'll do a DNA test. Let's see if you're really my child," I said, my eyes full of pity, though my lips curled into a mocking smile. "You?" Her face twisted in shock. "Yes, me. The same country bumpkin you've smeared everywhere. The truth is, I'm your biological mother." "Enough. Stop this act. My mom died when I was 10, and you're just the stepmother my dad found afterward. If you were really my mother, why did you try to kill me on my 12th birthday? I remember it perfectly. You blindfolded me and led me step by step toward the edge of the rooftop." She brought up that incident again, her emotions surging so strongly that she seemed to have forgotten the knife still pressed against her neck. "You're right," I admitted. "That day, I truly wanted to kill you." "Did you all hear that?" she shouted to her phone, triumphant. "She just admitted she tried to kill me, and she dares to call herself my mother? It's absurd." Her gloating made me press the blade slightly harder against her neck, reminding her of its presence. Feeling the weight of the knife, she immediately fell silent. "While we're talking about this, let me ask you something. How exactly did Lao Lin's wife die?" Her body stiffened at my question, as if stung by a bee. "Well," I demanded. She had an asthma attack and died." "What else is there to say?" she replied, her tone impatient but lacking conviction. "You're still lying even now? Then let's see what this knife has to say." I slid the blade across her neck just enough to draw a faint line of blood. "You're really going to kill me?" she asked, disbelief flashing across her face. "What do you think? If you don't tell the truth, the next cut won't be so gentle." I raised the knife again, ready to strike. Okay, I'll talk," she cried out, her voice trembling. "That night, my mom had an asthma attack. I went to get her medicine, but I dropped it. It rolled under the bed, and before she could finish, I slapped her hard across the face. Don't lie to me. Lao Lin told me that Shinrong kept her asthma medication by her bedside. Why would it end up under your bed? I remembered it vividly, the day I found half a bottle of medicine under her bed while cleaning. For the first 2 years living with Lin Jinxing, I had tolerated her tantrums, tricks, and spiteful pranks, convincing myself she was still just a child. But when I found that medicine bottle and remembered Lao Lin's stories, everything clicked. Lao Lin had once confided to me, Shinrong adored Jinxing but was strict about her studies. Jinxing hated studying, so their nightly homework sessions always ended in fights. That's why Jinxing felt closer to me. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But later, while sorting through her old notebooks, I discovered several pages where she had written Lu Shinrong, go to hell, in large, aggressive letters, her handwriting cutting deep into the paper. Seeing those words alongside the medicine bottle made me realize I might be the only person who truly understood how Lao Lin's wife had died. I had seen her spray bug spray into my food and slip needles into my bedding, yet I told myself she was just a child. But now, I couldn't deny the truth any longer. She wasn't a child. She was a born monster. The day I found the medicine bottle was her birthday. In that moment, I felt as though Shinrong was trying to tell me something, perhaps to help me understand the difference between a child and a demon. Shinrong, I'm sorry. It's my fault. A life for a life. Today, I'll use both of ours to make amends to you. When I brought her to the rooftop that day, my plan was to jump with her. But the word mom softened my heart and blurred my judgment. I thought maybe she wasn't beyond saving. But now, seeing Lao Lin fall victim to her as well, I regret it all. I truly regret it. Lin Jinxing clutched her face, sobbing uncontrollably. Through her tears, she stammered, I was young. I didn't think about the consequences back then. I was scared and sorry afterward. I've changed.
I really have.
Changed? If you'd changed, you wouldn't have treated your father like this. I roared at her. Turning my rage toward her phone, I saw the flood of comments scrolling by. I didn't care what they were saying. All I wanted was to make the truth known. The memories of my past haunt me like a nightmare, lingering to this day. Apart from Lao Lin, I've never told anyone else about it. It's the deepest wound in my heart, one that has never healed. Even now, I can feel it festering, its decay nauseating me. When I was 19, I was dragged into a forest by a gang of thugs. No matter how much I resisted, screamed, or begged, they didn't let me go. Afterward, I thought about ending my life, but the thought of dying filled me with bitterness. After all, I had fought so hard to get into the college I had dreamed of, finally breaking free from my impoverished rural home to see the wider world. I admit I was too afraid to die. I didn't report it to the police either. In my hometown, the outcome for a victim in such cases wasn't much better than for the perpetrator. I convinced myself that if I could just endure the humiliation, it would eventually fade away. But fate had other plans. 2 months later, I discovered I was pregnant, while still a student. My first instinct was to abort the child. But as a scholarship student from the countryside, I had no money for the procedure. Moreover, I dreaded the doctor's questioning and the consequences if my school found out. After much deliberation, I abandoned the idea of abortion. I decided to secretly carry the pregnancy to term and deal with the baby afterward. In the later stages of pregnancy, to avoid suspicion from my classmates, I wrapped my torso tightly with layers of bandages every day. Honestly, I never intended for the child inside me to survive. But I must admit, the baby was resilient. Despite everything, she came into this world alive. The day I gave birth to her, I was prepared to dispose of her myself. But when I saw her soft, pink face in my arms, my heart melted. Dormant maternal instincts awakened in me. In that moment, I didn't just want her to live. I dared to hope she could find happiness. But it wasn't something I could give her. Powerless, I wrapped her in a blanket and placed her by a trash bin in a residential area under the cover of night, praying that someone kind would take her in. I didn't leave right away. I hid nearby to watch over her, afraid that a stray cat or dog might harm her. After all, she was my child. When I saw Lao Lin and his wife arrive and cradle her lovingly in their arms, I finally felt at ease. After that, I quietly followed them, memorizing their address. I can't explain how I felt. Perhaps it was maternal love, but I wanted to keep watching her grow. After graduating, I found a job and even rented an apartment in Lao Lin's neighborhood, just to be close to my daughter and check on her well-being. Every time I saw Lao Lin and his wife doting on her as if she were their own, I felt immense gratitude. But I never imagined that the very child I entrusted to them would end up destroying this kind-hearted couple. Lin Jingxing has told you that her father married me out of lust. But now I'll tell you the truth. When I learned that Lao Lin's wife had passed away, I approached him myself and told him I was willing to help raise Jingxing. Lao Lin flatly refused, until I revealed the content of the note I left with Jingxing. That's when he realized I was her biological mother. Shocked, he finally agreed. To give Jingxing better care and to provide me a legitimate reason to stay close to her, he married me despite the judgment of others. I paused, my voice steady, but filled with conviction as I continued. Over the years, I've witnessed everything Lao Lin did for Jingxing. Both he and his late wife were good people. I was determined not to let anyone tarnish Lao Lin's name. I wanted to vindicate him. Turning my focus back to Jingxing, I said, "Do you know why I didn't want Lao Lin to spend any more money on you? Because you're not worth it. Every time I saw his sacrifices for you, I felt a crushing guilt. The debt you and I owe him and his late wife can never be repaid." Jingxing lowered her head, sobbing. Her face was hidden from me, but her tears were clear. Finally, I had exposed the old, festering wound that had been buried deep inside me. The pain of tearing it open left me hollow, but also strangely relieved. The psychological weightlessness made the knife in my hand feel unbearably heavy, as if I could barely hold onto it. Suddenly, there was loud banging at the door. A crowd had gathered outside. I guessed it was either the police or the neighbors. A final flicker of reason made me release my grip on the knife. Turning to the camera, I addressed the audience one last time, speaking slowly. "Don't let her fool you anymore. She's nothing but a monster." With those words, I dropped the knife onto the floor and turned toward the door. It was over. Everything was over. But just as I stepped forward, I felt a sharp, searing pain in my back. I turned to see Jingxing's distorted face, her hand clutching the bloodied knife. Summoning all my strength, I forced a mocking smile and whispered, "Monster." My words seemed to push her past the brink. She raised the knife again, her movements wild and frenzied, and brought it down on me once more. In that moment, my soul was finally freed. Floating away, I felt a twisted sense of comfort in how well I had understood her. Of course, she wouldn't spare the woman who had destroyed her. In front of so many witnesses, she had killed me. This time, I was sure she wouldn't escape justice. The knife I dropped wasn't an act of surrender, it was bait, part of my plan all along. Lao Lin, Shinrong, please accept this long overdue atonement of mine.